One day in the late 1960s, when I was a boy in my hometown Jinan in eastern China, I saw a smiling Westerner dressed like a Chinese worker riding a green bicycle. I was astonished. It was the Cold War, and China was cut off from the West. This Westerner was the first I'd ever seen, and was as alien to me as a creature from outer space. His name was James Veneris. He was captured during the Korean War and had chosen to stay in China. Veneris had served in the U.S. Army in World War II in the Pacific Campaign against the Japanese. Like many veterans, he was unable to find work in peacetime America and had re-enlisted at the start of the Korean War in 1950. President Truman had sent American troops to Korea to stop the spread of communism. The USA, with its allies, under General McCarthy and the flag of the United Nations, crushed the North Koreans and threatened my country, the People's Republic of China. Chairman Mao mobilized a Chinese volunteer army which pushed the UN troops back to the 38th parallel. After 3 years of war, 1.5 million dead and 2.5 million injured, the United Nations Command and the Communist forces signed an armistice on July 27, 1953. Korea remains split into two countries, North and South. There were thousands of prisoners on both sides. All those who refused repatriation to their homeland were transferred to a neutral zone and given 90 days to reconsider their decision. 23 of them, including James Veneris, were Americans. There was also one British.
Everywhere they used to sing freedom song, freedom song, freedom song. We rejoice to show the world that we are strong, we are strong, we are strong.
Does anybody want to go home? No!
Before the 90 days expired, two Americans, Edward Dickinson and Claude Batchelor, decided to return home.
Corporal Batchelor, how did you become a progressive? By reading several of the books that the communists had and newspapers. Gradually, little by little, I began to believe a lot of their charges against the UN side.
Well, I never decided to go to communist China. I wanted to get my revenge for my buddies that have been killed and starved to death and what they have done to me.
Corporal Edward S. Dickinson, back with us once again here in the free world.
Nevertheless, both were court-martialed and sentenced to 10 and 20 years in prison.
If I'd returned, take a look at what happened to Dickinson and Batchelor, I'd be in the same place they are. More likely up for a death sentence or a prison term. I don't feel it's right. I'd like to see each and every one of you Americans stand up now and oppose McCarthy and his acts.
My name is Harold Webb from West Palm Beach, Florida.
My name is Aaron Wilson from Urania, Louisiana.
This is a very happy moment for me, for now I am free from McCarthyism. Friends, the only way to stop fascism in America is to do as I have done, stand up and fight for our rights.
William C. White, Thomasville, Arkansas. For the first time in my life, I've witnessed complete equality. South Koreans, Mexicans, Filipinos, white men, all mixed together.
My name is Louis Griggs, and my home is at Jacksonville, Texas. I stayed behind to escape the Red Bait and McCarthy, and to assure that I'll never again have to fight in another unjust war as I did in Korea. Even if I had wanted repatriation, the fates of Dickinson and Batchelor would have stopped me.
My name is Richard Tennyson. I live in Alden, Minnesota. People who hate war and stand up for their beliefs are faced with McCarthy and his fascist gut-control House Un-American Activities Committee. I will return someday when I can speak for peace lawfully. That's when I will return.
He supposedly has rejected this country, but I don't believe that that was brought about through his own decision. My estimation of this situation is that he's a victim of brainwashing that was brought about through mental as well as physical torture.
The USA was alarmed by the Red Menace and believed that the Chinese had brainwashed the American POWs. Senator Joseph McCarthy, head of the Committee on Un-American Activities, led a series of investigations feeding on public hysteria. McCarthy branded the 21 soldiers as traitors and turncoats. I have never forgotten the Westerner on the green bicycle and have always wondered what happened to James Veneris and the other POWs who chose to live in China. But 50 years have passed since their fateful decision. After a long search, I found one of them, David Hawkins, the youngest of the group. I met him on his first trip back to China after 47 years.
It's kind of like coming home, believe it or not. It's like, it's kind of like coming back to a place that has a lot of memories for you. The turning point of my life, I guess you would say. I've always had an affinity for the Chinese people. I've always wanted to come back and see it later, to see what changes were made. Oh, wow. It's huge. It's a whole new city. Outside of the signs, it looks like one of the freeways coming into Los Angeles.
As I traveled with David Hawkins in China, I realized that it was an act of great courage for him to appear in this film.
We are South Koreans, American, and British who love our homes, our people, and our countries. What unites us all is our desire for peace, for real democracy and social equality. Anyone who breathes the word peace in America now becomes at once a communist and an outlaw. But here we have learned much and have caught a glimpse of what man can achieve when he works for the common good and not for personal gain. That goal of happiness and peace can never be reached unless peace is kept. We believe that our greatest task is to keep the peace and win democracy for our people. But if we return, our voices will be silenced. That is why we are here.
My guest tonight is the youngest U.S. Army turncoat of the Korean War. You see him behind me. He's David Hawkins of Oklahoma City.
The Mike Wallace Interview.
3 years ago, the United States was stunned by an announcement from war-torn Korea. U.S. Army Private David Hawkins and 20 other prisoners of the communists had become turncoats. They had renounced their own country and disappeared behind Red China's bamboo curtain. Dave, first of all, let me ask you this. Another explanation of the turncoats was suggested in the New York Times on August 14, 1955. Most of the turncoats really were not converts to communism, but were themselves guilty of crimes against their fellow Americans in captivity and did not wish to return to face the music. What about that?
I don't consider that true. None of the fellows that were with me were... I read some articles also on this, on clippings that we received while in China, that said that a lot of us were guilty of murder or had committed acts of treason while in the camp, or stolen food from their buddies, or was responsible directly for another fellow prisoner of war losing his life. This is not true.
I joined in September of '49, which was 1 month after my 16th birthday. We went to Korea by boat, and we were within a half a day's travel of the Chinese border. And we kept running into companies, battalion strength of Chinese volunteers as we were making our ways over the mountains. And then at some point further on, we got in kind of a firefight, and I got hit. And when I woke up, I was in a Chinese field hospital. A Chinese patrol had found me. The first words I heard was from the doctor, who said, we are friends, we're not going to hurt you. Those months between November and probably the coldest parts of the months, November, December, January, February, probably in the compound that I was, if there were, say, 500 GIs in the area, by the time they went on the march back to the main camps, I seriously doubt if there were more than 50 alive.
My search for survivors also led me to Lynn, the widow of Clarence Adams. She was the first woman in China to marry a black American. She now lives in Memphis, Tennessee, with their daughter Della.
I am Clarence Cecil Adams of Memphis, Tennessee. My family and millions of other Negroes, plus myself, have suffered under the brutal attacks of white supremacy and the cruel slave laws of the southern states. These are the reasons why I can't be living happily with my family.
I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, where I was raised. I come from a working class family. My mother working at White Rose Laundry, and my father at that time worked at Memphis Furniture Factory.
He lived out back in what is called a carriage house, and actually over the carriage house.
During my last years in high school, I was basically getting into a lot of trouble.
He and his friends, his buddies, whatever, they were like a gang, were roving around the railroad tracks, and this white man started following him.
He wanted to know if we could get him a black woman. We walks away from him. He followed. And he kept hollering, "Hey boy, why can't I get me a black woman?" We're afraid because we know what can happen. If we do something to him, they lynch us. We'll never get out of jail. We walk it.
One of the guys just turned around and popped him in the mouth.
He went down. When he went down, we stumped him, all five of us, and we left.
The next morning, the cops came, and they knocked on the door, bam, 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 opened the door, and it's the cops. So my dad was sitting in the kitchen, though, and his mother said, "Skippy's not here," really loud, to let him know, the cops are looking for him. And he went straight out the back door. He runs down the railroad track all the way downtown to the recruiting station and joins up.
I went in the Army in 1947. However, the Korean War changed my whole fate. I was captured, which was November the 30th, 1950.
It wasn't difficult for me to find the home of James Veneris, that first Westerner I had seen as a child. Bai Xirong, his widow after 40 years of marriage, still lives in the same apartment in G9.
就是我的很久，就是我的老伴儿，分不开的白头到老。
I am James G. Veneris of Hawthorne, California. Under the present conditions in the States, I cannot return. And when peace is established in the world, then I'll come back. You can blame all of this on the reaction in the United States and on McCarthy and his clique.
我在山上里边有一个院儿，一个小空窿，山洞，对，一个山洞里。我在里边他们不知道的，我在那，我也盖起来了，我用那个树木。可是以后他们都吃饭了，吃完了饭以后，志愿军来一个志愿军拿一颗烟，都给每一个人一颗烟。
志愿军给那些联合国军发烟，
对，
那是战俘。
哎，对了，给他们烟吃。我是烟鬼，我那个洞里边24个钟头没有吃烟，我也顾着还，我也看了志愿军是用钱买的东西，我考虑不如就拿了，不要给他这个钱，知道给那个农民的钱。哎，我拿我的步枪，我下来了。我那个志愿军可是可高了，原来我想中国人可是都野的呢。嘿， 他看我，他说 "Do you surrender?" 他说的英文的，你投降了吗？我说我投降了，我投降了，意思是 sit down， 让我坐下，让我坐下 ，have a cigarette， 他就给我一根烟抽。哎呀，可醉了，可值了。
那我知道了，你这个投降志愿军的做战俘是为了那根香烟。
对，
对呀，对。
从前申请过要加入中国国籍，好像。
My father applied for Chinese citizenship, but for unknown reasons it wasn't approved.
再后来他那个
Then, right before he died, we were told that his request was going to be granted.
可以批准他。
But it was too late.
还没办嘛，他就去世了。
昨天他说他想入党，我得保带什么中国。
He always said that he'd like to join the Chinese Communist Party
命都是中国人。
because the Chinese saved his life. He had deep feelings for them.
在朝鲜战争哈，
He almost died in Korea, and the Chinese took good care of him.
那个时候照顾
He never forgot that.
他忘不了。
In 1950, only a year after the birth of the People's Republic of China, the Chinese army was surprised at how many Western soldiers they captured. China mobilized hundreds of young graduates to work as translators and instructors.
When the Chinese first came across and actually captured as many people as they did, there was no place to keep us or food to give us.
We were experiencing many deaths from malnutrition, the wounded, which were not cared for, and it was a basic situation where every man had to fend for himself.
During the first few months, 2 or 3 POWs died in each unit every day. That's about a dozen per day in every camp. Mortality was very high. Doctors and nurses on the medical team worked very hard to save lives and lower the mortality rate.
Once you started thinking about going home and your hamburgers and the steaks and the sort of thing, and you started drinking the cold water, that was a death knell.
They didn't know our policy, didn't know what we were going to do with them, if we were going to kill them, or force them to do hard labor, or keep them in China forever and not let them return home. So they worried a lot.
My supervisor asked me to read the regulations to the POWs. It began with, "Dear students." I was very surprised and asked why, because to me, they were prisoners and we were their captors. But my supervisor said, "Yes, they are students and you are instructors."
Students, remember, we didn't even call us prisoners of war. We were just kind of like students. We were there under their care. But I never saw any instance of mistreatment in the prisoner of war camp, ever.
We were trying to tell the POWs that capitalism was doomed to collapse and socialism was bound to win.
We had to go to lectures every day for the first year. I mean, they come and got us no matter where we were hiding, and we had to go up on the top of the hill and listen to lectures.
But after a couple of months, we found that such a theory was untenable, was unacceptable to almost all the POWs.
Prime Minister Zhou told us, not too much lecturing, not too much political education. Concentrate on the principle of opposing the war for peace.
We changed by telling them that such a war was unnecessary, was dirty. Some POWs began to think that the American government should not have been involved in such a war.
Everyone signed peace petitions. I mean, that was, why are you here and 5,000 miles away from your home fighting a war that we didn't even know where the hell the place was whenever we went over there.
We had no business over there. And I actually felt that way.
And do you still feel that way? that we were wrong to go to Korea? When I say we, that the United Nations was wrong to try to contain communism there, that President Truman was wrong?
I think it was a mistake still.
Why so?
I don't think that we have the right to interfere in a civil war of another country, to try to stop it when it's not even close to our own shore.
You believe now that that was a civil war?
Yes, I think it was a civil war.
There wasn't too much friction between prisoners and captors, who were the Chinese. They said, we don't understand the American way of life, so we need some volunteers to explain what the Americans like and what we wanted. And I said, well, look, I'll go. I volunteer. I asked for recreation equipment. I asked if we could use an old building to set up a recreation hall where we sit. I said, some of the guys are religious. They want to know if they can worship. I asked if what food they brought us, if we could let our cooks cook it the way we like it. So they agreed with everything I said. In about 2.5 to 3 months, they brought in baseball bats, football. We exercised every day. The guys began to get strong.
We demolished what was left of a Japanese factory, and that became our playing field. And later on, we actually built clubhouse. We had our own clubhouse. We even had what they called the Intercamp Olympics.
When I came across this film archive, I could not believe my eyes. This must be the only prisoner of war camp in human history to have ever organized an Olympic Games.
I was very quickly labeled as a progressive because I read voracious, read everything I could get my hands on. And I volunteered when I was asked to pass. I was like the mail clerk. They gave me the mail for my platoon, and I passed the mail out. And I was in charge of the bulletin board, and I could type. So during the Intercamp Olympics, I did all the typing for the newspaper that covered the Olympics.
And I remained in the prisoner of war camp until the end of war. And Chinese sent me away to study. Then they sent me back to camp to give lectures. And I gave lectures on capitalism, imperialism, history of social development. I learned the difference between all of those right there in the prisoner of war camp. And I taught it to the other prisoners.
Somebody came to talk to me and said, you know, this is going to be over. He said part of the agreement of the ceasefire was those prisoners of war who did not want to go back home could choose a country. For instance, they go wherever they wanted to go, if that country would accept them. As it turned out, I think there were 21 Americans who chose, in fact, to go to China. I've often been asked as to why.
You became a turncoat. You renounced your country. Why? What did you have against the United States?
Well, Mike, it wasn't actually that I had something against the United States. We did spend over 3 years in captivity. I was captured only 17 years old. And I underwent the mass indoctrination program that the Chinese instigated in the camp. And there was a lot of things that they told me that sounded to me like common sense.
I chose China for many reasons. With that close contact we had, I began to wonder about communism, what it was like. And it's a known fact that every man wants to better his life. He wants to do more in life. I was assured by the camp authorities that, well, you know, we don't discriminate. It's not the principle, it's not our principle to discrimination. We believe that all people are equal. So that was a great encouragement for me to help me make my decision. And of course I did ask the question of marriage, could I marry? And the Chinese said, we got plenty of women, it depends on whether them like you or not. So we left Korea, we got on the train, we left Korea and went to China. course, the first day in China, they gave this humongous banquet for us. I mean, I had seen never. In fact, in my whole life, I had never seen so much food. Beautiful table. Man, the table was long and just covered with everything you could imagine. I mean, some good cooking.
With such great expectations, the 22 former POWs entered China. Treated as dignitaries, they were invited to the 1954 May Day parade in Tiananmen Square. This was 4 years after the founding of the People's Republic. We Chinese were passionately united and working to build the new democratic socialist society.
I used to ride my bike here all the time. You know, you have to ride your bike kind of like the cars so that you don't get ran over. Other than that, it's not the same. More people, more cars. Used to visit this place on a pretty regular basis with Russian friends from the China Club. Oh my God! Now this is like coming home. This is my homecoming. This was my school for 2.5 years.
David Hawkins and 6 of the former POWs studied at the People's University in Beijing. They were known as peace fighters.
Adams was here, Clarence Adams. Howard was here. Who else? Sullivan was here.
My first schooling was at the People's University of China. It's where we took a 2-year preparatory course. First of all, we couldn't speak the language, so we basically dealt in the language and Chinese history, and the history of the Chinese Communist Party and the history of the Russian Communist Party, Soviet Communist Party.
Oh, come on, get in there. Well, 谢谢你们. Well, the place has grown so much bigger since I was here.
This paper mill in my hometown, Jinan, is where James Veneris worked for 20 years.
If 你有几种选择，所有的选择留下来的战俘都可以去做农民，也可以去做工人，可以去上大学，还可以自由选择其他的职业。你后来为什么选择了做工人呢？
我从小的时候，我的祖父、我的爸爸，我们都是工人，所以我不知道别的，体力劳动干活。
Veneris was a very good worker, very skillful, one of the best in our lathe workshop. He got along with everyone. He was a good joker, always teasing his co-workers. He was one of us.
家面都挺好，
When we were introduced, he made a good first impression. I already had 4 children. He liked them a lot. He gave us each a badge of Chairman Mao as gifts.
我将来的时候啊，我一看，我心里扑腾扑腾。还是这个，我定了，我的思想定了，我就要这个妇女。
这些领导哈都给讲吧，说脾气挺好。
他生了2个漂亮棒子的孩子，一个姑娘，一个儿子。我感谢你。
就是那个，我觉得我父亲嘛，在中国这么多年啊。
What I remember most about my father is that when people advised him to return to the United States, he always preferred to stay in China.
让他回美国，他觉得还是中国挺好的。
我父亲希望我将来能在美国。
In the end, my father wished me well in the United States. I knew I could make more money here. But he insisted I never join the U.S. Army. He was adamant. For him, soldiers are nothing but cannon fodder.
So far, the Chinese had managed to fulfill all of my requests. I've been given an opportunity to study, and I was studying now in the Wuhan University.
And that's the first time I see a real black man in China. Before, I only see black people is in the movie. That time we know each other is 1957. Okay, and then we see each other almost 7-8 months.
After about a year of courtship, we got married. The whole conversation on the mountain where the university was located was on what the baby would look like. Some said the baby would be checkered. Some said it would be black on one side and white on the other. Some said it would look like a zebra. It was done in the years of 3 hard years that they had in China where there was very little food to eat because they were paying back a huge Korean War debt to the Soviet Union. I had been offered extra rations, but I said, well, since I lived in China, I'll just live like the rest of the people. And I turned them down. But a lot of times when the fishermen called, they would steal a few fish and bring it to me so that I could make some soup for my daughter. Like this old farmer, for instance, that he had a huge family of his own, and he had a hen that laid an egg, and he wanted to get to the house so that we could have that one egg for breakfast. And that's how the ordinary people treated.
Red Cross just tell him he will go to Beijing, do the translate, work at the Beijing Foreign Language Press.
We moved to Beijing in 1961, so I was only 2 years old. We had a really nice apartment in a complex full of people that were like us. All kinds of people, black, white, Africans, British. They would come to our house and we have parties late into the night. Now my father, I don't know exactly how much he made, but something like 3 or 4 times the amount of money that an average Chinese would make.
He managed to get in contact with the Beijing office of Voice of Hanoi. He made broadcast speeches to the black soldiers fighting in Vietnam, urging them to go back home and fight for racial equality and their own freedom. So I think he did his share toward world peace and international understanding.
Confronted with the challenges of living in such an alien culture, several of the young peace fighters quickly became discouraged.
William C. Coward, 22. Louis W. Griggs and Otho G. Bell, 24. Young Americans who converted to communism during their captivity in Red China, only now to recant. The 3 turncoats face Army authority under a 1950 law which permits trial for serious offenses committed while in service, allegedly helping prepare enemy-sponsored propaganda, soliciting a general officer of the Army to desert, informing on fellow prisoners, and other charges. They're whisked off to stockade, their fate to be decided with the justice they know exists in the land they had renounced.
The three Americans had chosen to work on the state farm in rural China. Wu Da-shou, their Chinese Red Cross representative, still remembers them.
It was a different country. It was a completely different environment for them. Nothing was familiar. At night there were no bars to go to, no discos and no concerts. And I think the fact that they couldn't find girlfriends was another big factor. At the time, we were concerned that if they left, it would create a negative image of China. But our leaders told us that even if they said bad things about us after returning home, it wouldn't really matter. There was so much anti-Chinese sentiment all over the world that a little more would do no harm.
Turncoat Richard Tennyson, flanked by Red Cross officials and local police. He is one of 21 former American PWs who refused repatriation in Korea and chose to live in communist China. The 22-year-old turncoat takes his first steps of freedom en route home to Alden, Minnesota.
Most of the former POWs left China before 1966, but found they were not welcome back in the USA. It was hard to find work, and two were committed to mental hospitals.
The embassies, of course, was supplying me with whiskey and so forth. And I did a lot of little cooking there on my own, American food, soul food. And even the ambassadors, when they heard that I was cooking, they came around. And they supplied the booze and I had the food. And we had a nice time. However, the Chinese was noticing this sort of relationship. And they didn't particularly like it. So they asked me to cut down on it. So I knew then that I was getting in bad with them.
Red Cross say you go to work in the factory like a veneris. But Adams say that's very strange. Why should I change job? What about my Chinese? Just to forget it?
The Chinese have a way of letting you know what they think about you. When we first went to China, they called us comrades. And after some years in China, they switched from comrades to calling us peace fighters, which means a step down. With comrades, we one of them. When you become a peace fighter, you can be anybody fighting for peace. Then later on, the worst thing to be called in China is to be called a mister. Then they started addressing us as Mr. Adams, and then you know that you're completely out. When they start using that, when you become a mister, that's the worst thing to be.
Shortly before the 1966 Cultural Revolution, Clarence Adams decided it would be wise for him to return with his family to Memphis, Tennessee.
My wife at that point didn't want to come because a picture of America had been painted to her as a very terrible place to live, and there's discrimination and the crime, which is basically true. So it took me a while to convince her that everything would be all right.
When we got to San Francisco, every day, early in the morning, some men came and got my daddy, took him off. And later, of course, I found out it was the CIA and you know, I don't know, maybe FBI, something like that.
当时要求留下来的22个美国人，又有人呢回去了。
对。
您那时候有没有动摇？想没想？干脆就是回美国。
我没有动摇回美国，我选择到中国来，我永远不会后悔。
During the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, young Red Guards tried to arrest Veneris, accusing him of spying for America. His comrades at work protected him, and Premier Zhou Enlai declared Veneris an international peace fighter, and that he was not to be harmed.
这个是老五的，这个是老五，是我的姑娘，挺漂亮。这个是老大，他可会做菜，他来了哈，我和他妈妈哈不干活了。 这是老三儿子，这是最棒的，也是我的保镖。这个是1、2、3个孙儿，2个孙女。How are you? See you later. I love you. I love you too. 哎，你不给我碰杯吗？哎呀，这么多年，31年了，一块儿了。
After his 2 years of studies in Beijing, Hawkins wanted to be a truck driver, and the Chinese Red Cross got him a job at a car parts factory in the city of Wuhan in southern China.
Yeah, this is my work town. This is where I lived and worked for over a year. The name of the factory, Wuhan Qixia Peizhenchang, was written on both sides. And I used to stop my truck here, let all the rest of the workers off. Yeah, part of the foundry, still have some of the machinery, and the lathes are here. I think this is one of the areas where Sullivan worked, in one of the machine shops. 你们好，你好，你好。我认识你啊，你好啊，好久没见了。你好，你好。recognize it。你好，你好，你好。Hey, long time, long time。你好，你好。你好。他是我的最好的朋友了，哎，最好的朋友。
This is a warehouse.
Yes.
Warehouse,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Yeah.
This is a garage.
Garage. Yeah.
Garage. But the garage is destroyed.
Just gone, yeah.
And then we rebuild that building.
Yeah.
So you can keep this photo. Keep this photo, okay?
David Hawkins explained to me why he decided to return to the USA in 1957 after a 7-year absence.
Where I've been gone long enough, the climate here is not the same as changing rapidly as well, and I think it's time that I went back and I'll face whatever's there. Then I'll just face it as I come to it.
Let's try to find out tonight, among other things, why he became a turncoat and why he returned home just 4 months ago.
Personally, I went to China to compare what I'd heard with what they actually practiced in China. I went because I was very curious by nature.
What had you heard?
Well, only what our Chinese captors had told us, how great they were working toward socialism and the great strides that they were taking in bettering the life of the Chinese people who for so many thousands of years had lived a life of oppression under various governments and was backward. And
well, why did you feel this sense of identification, of wanting to know about them? Had you not been told by our own army?
No.
They never discussed the Chinese?
No.
They never told you what to expect? Were you to be captured?
Yes, they said we'd be killed.
Did you hear about the Soviet Russians and what they did in Hungary?
That was the main thing that definitely made me take the step to return to the United States.
And when you made up your mind to come back to the United States, did they stand in your way? Did they try to persuade you to stay?
No.
Can we be sure that you yourself have not been sent back here in some manner to work on behalf of the Red Chinese?
You wouldn't know for sure.
Do they believe in our freedoms?
No, to them it's much different. And we have an aggressive government that's always hunting for war. And
do you believe that the United States should recognize Red China?
Personally, I think they should.
Why?
It's a very big thing. They have a very large land area. They have 650 million Chinese population. And it's like saying there's a big elephant in front of you and you say he's not there until he becomes powerful enough to step on you.
Do you expect that they will become powerful enough to step on us?
I have no doubt of that.
Our economies are so close together that we have to be friends, because both of our economies now would suffer if we didn't cooperate with each other. When I went back to the States, sometimes they would ask how I was treated. I didn't want to say something that might get me in trouble with them, but at the same time I would not lie and say that I was ever mistreated by the Chinese, because that wasn't true. They treated me like family.
We are very thankful for you. We appreciate you coming here. For 15 years, to be good chance. You are very fortunate. And thank you.
And thank you for having me. 好，谢谢你们，好，谢谢你们 ，Thank you，谢谢你，谢谢你，小朋友，哎，来，谢谢 ，Thank you for having me. Thank you. Bye. Thank you, man. Bye bye.
Clarence Adams returned with his family to his hometown Memphis, ended 12 years of an exceptional life in China.
I wasn't very warmly received back here in America. We had some very hard times when I finally reached the shores here. I couldn't find work. In other words, the news media had really ruined me, and everybody wanted hands off. Even fellows that I had gone to school with, they were afraid of me because I was painted as a red. And of course, then later on, the government subpoenaed me, and I had to go to Washington, where they were trying me for treason.
He wanted knowledge, he wanted education, he wanted an opportunity, and that's what he told those people at the senators who subpoenaed him. He says, why? Because I'm a black man, I don't have the right to make a life for myself. You've done this all over the world. You've gone anywhere you wanted to go, and you did whatever you wanted to do to gain what you need to gain. But I'm a black man, and I can't do the same thing. I can't get a better life for myself. He had every right.
Clarence Adams, still working at 70, in his Memphis chop suey restaurant on Elvis Presley Boulevard, died in his daughter's arms. President Nixon's visit to China in 1972 ended the hostility between our two countries. The USA was no longer an enemy, and Veneris could at last visit his American family after being away for 26 years.
She 生了为了什么？错误的，从美国到朝鲜，为了什么我也没有弄清楚这个问题。去生了多少人，孩子、老人家，什么去生了？不要战争，我恨战争。
Living and working in China for half a century, respected and loved by co-workers and students alike, James Veneris was regarded by all as a symbol of international solidarity.
He has never died. He has just disappeared. That's well, Veneris, old buddy, I wish that I got to see you one more time, but I'm not too far behind you. I'm very sorry that I was not able to come and visit when he was alive. I would have liked to have done it. Have a good sleep, old buddy. We'll see you later. I wanted to know if she would like to be, if I could be her grandpa. Then I'll have grandkids at home, and I'll have grandkids in China. Halfway around the world. That's great.
Most of the 22 POWs have passed away. They carried the label of turncoats and traitors, and lived under the cloud of dishonorable discharge and disillusionment. They struggled to make a living after returning to their homeland. But they are heroes to me for trying to build bridges between enemies. They should not be forgotten.
We're not going back to the country we love because the humble but sincere effort we have put forward as prisoners of war of the Korean and Chinese side to the cause of peace would only bring us unmerciful persecution at the hands of a few peace haters now ruling the states. We not only want peace, but we want to fight for it.